So what does this say about the state of trade talks between the two countries, the fact that they are having another meeting? Joining us now to preview the visit is former Canadian ambassador to the United States, Frank McKenna. Welcome back to Power Play. How you doing?
Good. Thank you, Mike.
I wanted to start with that news that there's possibly some movement on the steel and aluminum tariffs. How significant is that in your opinion?
Well, if it's true, it certainly represents a breakthrough. You have to remember in context that we have the lowest tariff rates in the world at about 5%. That's because most of the products which cross the border are CUSMA compliant. The problem is that there are some exceptions which the United States have carved out that are at 50%, and that includes steel and aluminum. And for those particular industries, they're being really hard done by. But we have reason to believe that the United States is suffering as well from the steel and aluminum tariffs. In the case of aluminum, probably close to 75% of the aluminum used in the United States comes from Canada, which is really accelerating the cost for a lot of commodities within the United States and putting pressure on the government to find a compromise. So it wouldn't be surprised if there was some movement on those two commodities.
You bring up the trade deal and how we actually have a really good tariff rate, essentially, with the Americans. And that is something that this government has tried to tell that story as much as possible, despite the fact, as you rightly mentioned there, that disproportionately there are huge tariffs on other industries. How difficult is it for this government to try and tell that story when you have those industries suffering so much? And even though that the Canadian side seems to sort of sit back and say, hey, look, don't worry, we don't have that bad of a deal right now in spite of those other sectors.
Well, media quite appropriately like to lead with more spectacular news. Nobody ever runs a headline saying the Brooklyn Bridge didn't fall down today. So it's not surprising. And it's entirely appropriate that we would keep attention on those sectors. And by the way, it's not just steel and aluminum. It includes autos, where there's a mixed bag of tariffs. It includes copper, nickel, now pharma is coming. And the latest ones, which I think are outrageous, are on kitchen cabinets and furniture, on the guise that they represent a national security threat to the United States of America. So I think Prime Minister Carney should remind President Trump that you need to have a little balance here. Otherwise, you're going to be the laughingstock of the world with some of the tariffs that you're putting on. He also will remind President Trump that this is probably the largest, most complex trading relationship in the world. It's almost evenly balanced. In fact, it's heavily in the U.S. favor because they receive our raw materials, which they turn into jobs. So they're well advantaged from this. Not only that, but we have a large defense security relationship with America. There's no other country in NORAD except Canada. There's no other place in the world where the United States would have less of a military presence than the U.S.-Canada border. So we've always had their back, and we will continue to be part of any security and security pact that is created. So I think we need to remind them of all of those important features of the relationship, which accrue to the very strong benefit of the United States of America.
Do you think just reminding them is enough? Because, you know, people look at this and they often say that U.S. President Donald Trump needs a win from this. So, you know, is it that he would finally admit that some of these things are actually benefiting the U.S.? Or do you think that Canada might be giving him something in exchange for what we might see on Monday?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. It's commonly thought that he needs to have bragging rights on anything that takes place, and that's a fair game. I don't think that we mind giving him those bragging rights. There are areas where he's going to win around security, for example, energy security, oil, gas. Some $70 billion in Canadian wealth has been transferred to the United States of America by giving them discounted oil. But we can put other things in the window. Critical minerals, something that are in large abundance within Canada, something that the United States needs. Uranium is a commodity which they really need, especially as they ramp up their nuclear program. And we can create right of first refusals or preferential treatment for the United States in some of those areas. And around defense, we're going to be increasing our defense spending almost 3 times, up to probably $150 to $160 billion a year by 2035. Right now, 75% of that to 85% is spent on kit from the United States of America. We can divert that. We can buy it from other places in the world, or we can commit to a continuing relationship with the United States of America. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and quite frankly, we can create a lot of pain points for the United States should they persist in wanting to declare economic war on us.
Just in closing, how important is it for Prime Minister Mark Carney to come back from this specific trip, his second down to the White House in 6 months, with a win, something that he can present to Canadians as proof that he has gotten something done?
I don't think it's important at all. Quite frankly, I think it would be a mistake to set that up as the litmus test of the trip. The fact that he's going to the White House, meeting with the president, the fact that they will once again have a chance to establish and reinforce their personal chemistry, that quite frankly is win enough. And if he can come back with some concessions in several areas in response to some concessions that Canada's made, I think that really represents bonus and gravy. But just the fact that the two leaders seem to respect each other and are talking, I think that's a win for our country.
Former Canadian Ambassador to the United States, Frank McKenna, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.